My name is Trip Gorman, and on this episode of Semilla.VC, I sat down with Mads Peterson, co-founder and CEO of Bogotá-based Hippo.Build. Prior to founding Hippo, Mads worked at Founder Institute and held a number of different roles at startups, accelerators, and venture capital firms in Bogota, including at Tool, Marathon Labs, Latin Expansion Group, and Imaginamos. In this episode, we talked about how Mads and Hippo got into Y Combinator by disagreeing with a YC partner during their interview, how he saved $9,000 for a customer just paying $25, and why Latin America isn't that dangerous. We discussed all this and more in this episode of Semilla.VC. Okay, Mads, could you start by telling the audience a bit more about your work history up to and including your current role founding Hippo.Build?
Sure. Hi, Trip, by the way. I'm originally from Denmark, and I've basically always been an entrepreneur. I've always built things and created things, and it's just been like a disease or an infection since very early on. I started my first company back in high school when I was 15, 16 years old. Then I moved to London to do a bachelor's degree in international business after high school. And there I started another company in the cryptocurrency space in 2013. I worked in private equity, and then I started a small company in the medical device industry. We couldn't get a patent in the end after about a year of going around that. So after that, I moved to Colombia, where initially I worked in product development in a product development company. Then I did corporate innovation in a very big corporation here in Colombia. Then I led product in a B2B fintech, and 2 years ago I quit my job there. I did some odd jobs for a year, working part-time in a VC firm, going in and assisting a fast-growing startup here in the construction space on their fintech strategy and how to approach that, and just general product consulting. And a year ago, I was full-time on Hippo, and that's been the last 12 months.
Could you tell the audience more about Hippo? Why did you start it? How did that idea come about? What problem does it solve? Give us that whole arc for those who might not know about Hippo yet.
Sure. So when I was doing corporate innovation, I was basically hired to connect the bank, the insurance, and the construction company for this big corporate to design solutions for the subcontractors of the construction company, sort of tying in these different areas. And from that view, I just saw a million problems that they had. Like to put it into context, a small and medium construction company, basically, before they start a project, they'll do a back of the envelope calculation on, if this doesn't go well, how likely is it that my company will go bankrupt? And that's a pretty intense sort of calculation and consideration that you have to do before starting any project, because one little mistake, it's your company. It's not just, oh, the project didn't go well, or oh, I can't pay, or oh, the bank is going to be upset at me. No, your company will literally go bankrupt. So I started looking into that, and I saw that they have very poor software implemented. They basically go out and buy whatever software they can get their hands on, Trello, Excel, Microsoft projects, QuickBooks, etc. And they sort of build a crappy version of a construction ERP, where big companies, they can afford to pay Oracle or CMIC thousands of dollars a month, but smaller ones just can't afford that. So they end up having this dispersed software that doesn't really work for them. Like it solves these specific tasks, but you end up having a single person in the middle, usually the owner, copy pasting information from one side to the other, calling the job site, how much cement do we have left? Did we finish the task from yesterday? What about the quality control report? Where's that invoice? And then updating all these systems. And instead of going out and trying to build a competing ERP and saying, oh, we'll just, build a project management tool and this tool and this tool, we felt that that wasn't really what the market needed or what a construction company needed. They just needed to automate the owner's work out of that. Let's just connect this tool with that tool, start sending information from one side to the other. And the other problem was that, well, it's super expensive to get for them to acquire the software. So why don't we make it free, or very close to free at least? Because the construction company might not spend a lot of money on software, $2,000 or $3,000 a year, but they spend millions of dollars on materials, and they're overpaying for materials. So why are they overpaying for materials? Well, that's because major providers of materials can't sell efficiently directly to a medium construction company. But if I have access to all these companies and I know what they're building, when they're building, what their budget is, how much money do they have in the bank, when are they going to buy the next stuff, and if I know that from enough companies, well, I can just go straight to major providers and sort of bridge that massive gap. And if I act as a trusted partner in that transaction, none of the two other players will sort of feel that they're putting too much skin in the game or exposing themselves too much. So we're basically providing trust and access for these two players in the industry. And yeah, and so far so good.
It appears that this construction management, financial management for construction, this whole industry is just completely underdeveloped. You mentioned the first issue, and then you developed it into the second issue with the resource mismanagement and difficulty working with suppliers. Is it ever difficult to stop solving all the problems and just decide to solve two problems? Are there more problems that you want to solve in the future? How did you decide that these two were the ones that you wanted to focus on for right now?
So there's a million problems, and these problems are very big. And I don't think that we'll ever stop trying to solve problems, since we feel that most players in the space are very self-centered, or very focused on just maximizing revenue from the construction company. We saw, our hypothesis from the beginning was, well, we can build software that allows us to solve other problems. So the software solution, yeah, that needs to be a functioning product in and of itself. That needs to solve a core problem for them. But at the end of the day, the immediate need for them is always money. The immediate need is, oh, I have to pay for steel and cement and my workers and license and equipment. And then the software will always be like a secondary thought. Oh, if I've just finished a project and it went really well, then I can look at software, but it will never be their primary concern. So we always knew that, and we decided to tackle the material side first, because that was the quickest way we could give them money right into their pocket. Our first user here in Colombia, after 2 weeks of using the product, we called him up and said, hey, I've noticed that I think I can sell you some cheaper steel. Let me try. And they said, okay, sure. Like, what is the next thing you're going to buy, and how much are you going to pay for it? Okay, this much. Then we made a deal for them. We didn't charge anything for it. We just connected them with a better provider, better quality, actually. They paid $131,000 for the shipment. The shipment arrived, and they saved $9,000 in total. So then I called him up and said, hey, like, how did it go? Are you happy? And he's like, I don't understand this. I have no idea what's going on, because I paid you $25, 4 weeks ago, and you just gave me $9,000. Like, how does that make sense? And I'm like, well, if you just saved $9,000, will you then stay and be my client forever and continue to give me more and more access to your software and your information? He's like, of course. Like, if you continue giving me $9,000 every time I have to buy something, yeah. And then the next thing, of course, like, let's add in financing. Let's add in the payment channels. Let's connect with the banks and the fiduciaries. Like, all that will just allow us to underwrite loans faster and better. We can, instead of lending for a full project, 24 months, that's very complex, I can lend for like a specific thing and say, well, you have problems right now in paying for steel and cement to finish this part of the project. I can just lend you for that, because once you finish this stage, the fiduciary is going to disperse more money, and my risk is minimum. So like, that just makes a lot of sense to me, and I understand why it doesn't exist, but that's where we're headed, and that's what we're working for.
Could you tell us more about how you got funding for Hippo, and then also tell us about going through and applying for Y Combinator?
Sure. So, like I've been in Colombia now for 6 years, so my network is fairly okay. I worked with the founders of Rappi, my first job here, Colombia's first unicorn. So like through that and through some other contexts, I started working with a VC fund. So the idea was for them to put the first check in. That didn't come out as we had hoped, but a month after we sort of had agreed on not working together, I landed my first angel check from Andres and Daniel Bilbao, who have invested in quite a few good companies here in Colombia. And a month or 2 months after that, through their network and my own network, we did a party round of about $180,000. And then we said, well, like, of course, we have already applied for YC. Let's see what happens. And we didn't get any information, no information, no update, no invite for the interview. So like around October, end of October, it's like, yeah, okay, we're not gonna get there. But then mid-November they say, hey, we've given you a interview date, we would like to interview. Great. 6th of December, the last day that interviews were going. Okay, so like right at the end, fine. Like it was probably like, let's see what happens. So we do the interview, and the first 5 minutes is pretty standard. You do like a 30-second pitch, like to get the partners up to date and they understand what's going on, and then they ask a few questions about company and the traction, and then we move into this is the question that we got. So you are very cheap right now. You're the cheap option, but at some point you need to move in and be more exclusive and be a more expensive option for them, because that's how you're gonna maximize your revenue. And I said, no, we're not gonna do that ever. And then we spent 5 minutes arguing or debating this specific topic. So that was a majority of the interview. That was literally just me saying, well, I fundamentally disagree, because if I move up and be more expensive, I'm going to decrease the amount of companies that will use my software. And my whole play is I need more people to use my software, because so a large, like let's say Procore, big company, big software producer for the construction industry. A standard deal from them is like $5,000 or $6,000, let's say, a month. I can make on the same client, I can charge him $50 a month, but I can make $10,000 or $15,000 a month selling materials and providing access to financing. So why? And if I then move further down the line to a smaller company where I can make $5,000, $6,000 a month, and Procore might be able to sell one software for 350, but they're not able to because 350 is too much. But I can make way more money because I'm not charging the construction company. This software is literally the key that opens up the opportunity to sort of bypass the whole buying decision and go straight into the decision level of the organization, because I can see their budget. I can see, oh, you're going to pay $1.50 for a kilo of steel. Well, I'll sell it to you for $1.2. Do you want this? Click. Yes, updating the entire budget and purchasing plan and project plan, submitting the order with the steel provider, and I'm just sitting on the side. I never touch the materials. I never do logistics. So that to me is such a no-brainer, and it was one of like the things that really pissed me off, that nobody else, like none of the other software companies wanted to do it. They just want to maximize like the money they can squeeze out of the construction company, instead of looking at what can I squeeze out of the transaction and the industry and the project as a whole. So yeah, so that was like, I think that was really positive that I was so energetic and adamant that I was right in this thing. Then the interview ended, and basically the deal is, if you get an email, you're rejected. If you get a phone call, you're in. So like for 3 days, I'm just like updating my email. I hope there's no email from YC. I hope there's no email from YC. And there's an email from YC. It was like 11 o'clock. and it says we need to do another interview. So then we did another interview, and which was more or less the same thing, but less energetic. I explained my position, I explained why, and then half an hour after that, my co-founder and I, we went down to have a beer, and half an hour later they called and said that they wanted to offer us a position. So that was really awesome. Like very, very happy that day.
I love it. I want to move on and talk a little bit about the mechanics of building in Colombia. But first, I have to ask, you've mentioned a couple of times how you've been able to connect suppliers with lower prices to customers. How do you do that? And how does that work on the back end? Just kind of explain that a little bit, because it is incredible that you're just doing that from, effectively your office.
So basically, we're experiencing all the different versions of that relationship, as you can imagine. We contacted one of the biggest steel producers in Latin America 3 months ago and basically pitched what we're going to do, and they loved it. They were like, yeah, like this is literally the hardest market for us to break into. So great, let's try it out. Here's like, we'll lower the prices for you, and let's see what you can generate for us. And then we started generating 35K, 45K. This month we've done almost 150K in steel alone, in GMV. So that's a significant enough amount for them to actually say, okay, let's lower the prices even more. But they definitely took a chance. Like they had done their calculations. They knew that they wouldn't lose money on it, and like, why not? There are others that we've reached out to, like with the same pitch, who are like, nah, like you have to do this and you have to comply with this thing and that thing, and where it's like way more bureaucratic and rigid to sort of break into. So right now we have really good prices in steel, concrete, PVC, only in Colombia, and cement, like really good prices. So that's a good way for us to just drum up clients, like calling up a client and asking, how much are you paying for this? And well, I'll sell it to you for cheaper. And then after 1 or 2 good transactions, we bring them onto the platform, and then we can start to automate that. But right now it's, as we say in Spanish, chinomatic. It's like we're doing it not automatic, but like a person is like literally manually connecting those two things. And once like the first sale is done, we have like 6 months of repeat buys from that same client.
Could you tell us why you picked Colombia many years before you founded Hippo, and why Bogota?
I think the best reason that you could come up with, my wife is Colombian. We studied together in London, and then like immigrating to Denmark is borderline impossible. So we said, well, let's just go to Colombia. Like, what's the problem? So we just came here. I didn't speak any Spanish, didn't have any network or job, and just, you just gotta pick that up and learn and roll with the punches. And yeah, as I mentioned as well, like I worked in different things. I also did some consulting solo. So yeah, you just gotta roll. You just gotta start doing it. And like, what's not to love in Colombia? Like, honestly, maybe Bogota, the weather is not the best, but the rest is it's pretty nice.
Could you tell us about how you met your co-founder for Hippo, how you built out a team in Colombia, and some of the mechanics and things about, building in Colombia that maybe wouldn't be relevant if you were building in, say, the United States or Europe?
Oh, that's also a very complicated question. Well, at least the answer is complicated. So first of all, my co-founder Alberto, he was like the first Colombian I met not related to my wife. He was a friend of my wife's cousin, and he was like, yeah, you guys both like tech and startups, why don't you meet? And then we just got along, and I sort of used Alberto as my personal tech support for the last 6-7 years, where I'm like calling him up, working on a problem, whether it's for a client or consulting or in the corporate. I was like, oh, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, and how would you go about this, and how would you go about that, and sort of use this software, and what do you think about this solution, and sort of like using him like consulting a little bit. And then when I was investigating the space, and I got already quit my job, I was already sure where I was headed. I called him up and was like, hey, look at look at what I'm seeing. I'm thinking about building something like this. What do you think? And I didn't know this before, but a lot of people in his family are in the construction space. His cousins have a company. His dad was in Spanish it's gerente de obra, like a work job site manager. And so he just picked up immediately what the problems were, exactly the pain points, and knew exactly how, like, what I was seeing in the future and how we could solve it. And then back and forth for a couple of months, that was like, buddy, man, you gotta quit your job. We gotta do this. And then he quit his job, and a month later we had like the first check-in and full speed ahead. It's that sort of like leads on to like he of course we both interview everybody in the company, but we have 10 employees at the moment, a few extra freelancers. We're all remote right now, even though all of us are based in Colombia. But we do come across some problems that I don't think you see other places. Like comparing like just the US and Colombia. In the US, most software engineers are engineers first, and then their software. Where in Colombia, most developers are developers. They learned it online. They learned it by themselves. They learned it on YouTube or wherever. And 1 out of 100 are like, have that engineering understanding. Let's break down the problem. Let's figure out how to solve it in the most efficient way possible. But not everybody is like that. So one, it's hard to find that 1 out of 100 who's like an engineer first. Then if they speak English, prices have exploded the last 3 years. Like average salaries, I think, have increased with 4x in the last 3 years. So, and that's because like US companies are hiring a lot of talent in Latin America. It's cheaper, it's easier. And then like the time zone is the same. So why not? Like I contacted a friend of mine who I worked with 7 years ago, and I said, hey, like I'm building this thing. Do you want to come on board? We'll pay you $3,000 or $4,000 a month plus shares. And he's like, oh man, that sounds really, really awesome. But I'm being paid 10 plus shares. And then it turns out that I knew the CFO of the company where he was hired, who was Danish. So I called him up. I was like, what the hell, man? You're buying up all my talent. You're paying too much. And salaries really have exploded. And we as a company, we're quite picky, particularly with engineering talent. We really need them. We really need that price to be justified. But the team we have right now, they are extremely hard workers, extremely cool guys and girls. And yeah, we definitely couldn't be happier with them.
You tell us, you've mentioned a couple times that you've had many different experiences in Colombia before founding Hippo. What were maybe 1 or 2 of the highlights of things that really both told you about how Colombia works, Latin America works as a market, and then also kind of made it so you knew that you wanted to found something yourself in Colombia?
So I always knew I was going to found something. Like I always nerd around with things on the side. So it's just a question of sort of what was the next thing that would make me really obsessed. And yeah, so my first job was the founders of Rappi. They had another company previously that's still running today. It's just a development agency, a product developer, building websites and apps for other companies. And I entered there. And it was really like baptism by fire, because the one was the cultural part, another one was like, how do you do business here? Another one is like showing up and being European. There's doors that will open for you that you don't normally have opened if you're local. But then there's also like massive power distance that you have to deal with. Like even today, a lot of my employees, they feel uncomfortable telling me, but I think you're wrong, or I don't agree, or a client told me that they don't like this feature. Like that's really difficult for them to say, because there is a massive power distance. So there's a lot of things there. Like I did a lot of, I like to help people. So I always like now with YC application deadline, like was like last week, I think. I looked over like 4 or 5 different applications, like of some people that I don't really know either, just because like that's the help that I didn't get when I did my first startup back like 15 years ago. But I just like to help out. So I was doing that a lot as well in the beginning, and that sort of led into Founders Institute, and that's a a pro bono kind of approach to it, where you like bring together different founders and mentors who can show up and give classes and give their own experience and their own opinion on, oh, this is how I did product development, this is how I did fundraising, this is how I did this. And I think that's super valuable. And there's more and more of those offers in Colombia, and that wasn't really anything that existed before.
Perfect segue into discussing Bogota as like a tech city compared to other Latin American tech cities. You mentioned the weather might be a little bit worse than some of the other Latin American tech cities, but how would you compare Bogota to, say, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, some of these other Latin American tech capitals? And what does it have that the others don't, and how is it similar?
Like as a whole, they're all quite similar. They're all quite similar. Universities in Colombia, and particularly in Bogota, are fairly high standard. So you do have a lot more talent here than you do in other places. It's a very big city. Like I guess it's the little brother of Sao Paulo and Mexico City, but it's still 12 million people. It's still a massive, massive city. Now there's a lot more money. There's a lot more foreign capital coming in, with like a lot of people keep mentioning the Rappi Mafia, for better or for worse. But you do have now like not necessarily massive exits, but you have people who have exited previous experience where they've been schooled outside of the country, or at least with a culture from outside the country. And now they're founding more stuff, and that's just that ripple effect is really, really important. I think you see the same thing in Sao Paulo, and you see the same thing in Mexico City. I think Colombia as a market is a lot more forgiving. It's fairly easy to start a company. I think like 50% of the adult population in Latin America is self-employed. Well, in Colombia is self-employed, which is the highest in the world. So like people have that go-getter attitude. Let me go and start something. Let me go do something. Whether it's a little mom and pop shop or something else, like that's sort of beside the point. With the success of Rappi and other companies, people are seeing that massive opportunity, and they're thinking long term, and they're thinking in that sense. So, and there's a good community here. A lot of founders are investing in each other's companies and pulling money in. Oh, well, I know this guy. Let me call this guy, and he can put in 5K, 10K. Every little bit helps in the beginning. So I think that's pretty good. And the fact that like Brazil and Mexico have a lot more foreign interest than Colombia, at least like for the last decade. So you do have a lot more competition, whatever you start in Mexico City or Sao Paulo, where in Colombia you can sort of make mistakes early, and have less risk doing that. So I think that's probably the main thing, or those two things are probably the main thing.
Mads, I have 2 more questions. First, I'm going to ask, what would you tell American tech founders that maybe want to move? Unlike you had a lot of experience before founding a startup in Bogota. What would you tell those tech CEOs in the US that are thinking about moving and then starting something right away?
Well, that depends on what they're going to start. Like if you want to start something that has a global focus and something that you're bringing some experience for, or US market, but built by Latin American engineers, well, then you need to understand the culture of managing people here. Primarily, I would say if you're bringing your own money, then there's no problem. Otherwise, of course, network is always a major part of fundraising and getting money. If you're going to start something for a local audience and for a local market, I think understanding that market in detail is important. There are a few success stories of like foreigners moving to Latin America and in like 6 months launching a company that's going really well because they've seen it work somewhere else and they're just bringing in that idea. Sure, but I think there's a disproportionate amount of companies that fail that way because, I did not understand this unique thing about Colombia versus Brazil, or like for example, there's cities in Colombia where you can see like flying from Bogota to Medellin, there's a massive difference. Like in Medellin, it's like parking spaces and parking lots, it's uncommon for them to pay for it. Like it's more normal that the store or the mall just gives that away for free. But in Bogota, that's a massive business to set up a little parking space and, sell that out. So even like small things like that within the country, there's a massive difference. And I think it's common if you show up and you think that, oh, Colombia or Mexico or Latin America is very homogenous. It's definitely not. Definitely not. Where, okay, fine, you understand Germany or France, well, then you can sell to the entire country. But you can't do that in a country like Colombia or Mexico or Peru. There's big differences from the different regions.
Yet another excellently structured answer to a very broad question. You've done that a number of times on the interview, so I really appreciate that, Mads. But finally, I have to ask Peter Thiel's famous contrarian question, but with a uniquely Semilla.VC twist. What important truth about Colombia or Latin America do very few people agree with you on?
Well, I just hear a lot, and this is like particularly from foreigners like that, and also just when I had moved here from my wife's family, it's very dangerous. It's a dangerous place, and it just isn't. Like, yeah, like if you're an idiot and you go into dangerous areas and you wave your wallet around, you're gonna get mugged. But that's gonna happen in New York and Paris and Copenhagen. Like that happens everywhere, and like, use your brain where you're going and understand the where you're headed and understand who you're going to see, and don't be a stupid tourist. Then it's not dangerous. Like, so I think that's probably the main thing, particularly when, like, with the image of Colombia and the image of Latin America in general. Oh, Brazil is dangerous, you're gonna get shot. Mexico's really dangerous, you're gonna get shot. Like, no, like, calm down. It's not that bad. I've been here 7 years. I've never been mugged or assaulted or threatened or even been close to any of those things. And I used to walk all over Bogota, even into areas where, when I come home and I like talk to my parents-in-law and they're like, oh, so where were you today? Oh, I went to this area. And they were like, oh, no, you didn't. Like, yeah, I did. Like, no problem. But like, I might have been lucky, of course, statistically, but still, like, use your brain and you'll be fine. Come visit. It's a nice place.
What a great answer, Mads. Thank you so much for coming on the Semilla.VC podcast today. I very much appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching this episode of Semilla.VC. My name is Gorman. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you view the podcast. And don't forget to check out our newsletter, Dealflow LA, which can be found by going to dealflow.la.